when I was a little girl, I didn't like come out of the womb saying, I want to be an insurance agent. I was not technically, that wasn't my goal, is to be an insurance or to even be a business owner. I actually grew up in a pastor's home who grew up in a pastor's home. In fact, there's 5 generations of pastors in our line. So that was in my blood, or so I thought. But I went to school to be a pastor, and I quickly realized after graduating that this was not just going to happen for me like I thought it was. I didn't have a job lined up, so I moved back to Northwest Indiana, where I'm from, and I had a lot of student loans that I had to pay off. So I was like, I need a job, and nothing is opening up in the church, so I'm going to just get a job at the local insurance agency down the road. And I became a receptionist. And even though that wasn't my career of choice, my dad had always taught me to do everything with excellence. And so I tried to do that. I got all the licenses that I needed. I sunk my teeth into that job. I helped the agent grow her business. I quickly realized I really loved to sell. I loved helping people place products that they needed for their life. And so I found out that I loved the industry, but I did not love the company that I was working for. So in the meantime, I was falling madly in love with this guy who was a youth pastor in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I called him one day. We had been dating for about a year. And I said, hey, Dustin, what would you think about me trying to find a job in Indianapolis? And I think he didn't realize at the time how determined I could actually be. And I got off the phone with him. He was like, sure, go ahead, do your thing. Within an hour, I had 3 job interviews lined up at State Farm agencies in Indianapolis. I was so determined and very much so in love. So I was like, okay, this is happening. A month later, I moved to Indianapolis. I had a job at Rick Smith's State Farm agency. And there I worked for him for 4 years. And Rick was a godsend to me because he kind of let me do my thing. He let me hire interns and teach them how to sell and run a business. He helped me put systems and processes in place. I think he loved it because he could sit back and let me kind of run the agency, but I loved it because little did I know I was learning how to run a business. And so I was kind of I wasn't freaking out at this time that my plan to be in the ministry wasn't happening, because it was very likely that I was going to marry a pastor. So I knew, you know what, as long as I'm married to a pastor, I'll be okay, because being a pastor's wife is basically the same thing as being a pastor. Just ask my mom, without the paycheck though. So I was working, and it was all working out. I was working for him. I had my 9 to 5, and after 9 to 5, I didn't think about the job, and I would get to go do ministry with my husband on the nights and weekends. And it was just, oh yeah, by the way, we got married in that 4 years. Didn't have any kids at this point, but we were just rocking and rolling. We were having so much fun. I loved it. I felt like, man, God, this is your plan for my life. This is what we're doing. I'm collecting this paycheck from this job that I can kind of turn off at the end of the day, and then really get to do ministry with my husband at the end of the day. And so it was really working out, and I felt like this is what my life was going to look like. But like I said, I loved what I did at State Farm. So State Farm leadership approached me, and they were like, hey, why don't you open your own agency? And I immediately was like, no, that's not what God has for me. And I said I would think about it, and I did think about it. I went home and I thought about it for about an hour, and I was like, that's not what I'm supposed to do. So I told my husband, I was like, I don't think I'm going to do this. And I told my boss, hey, I'm with you long term. This is what you have me long term. And I told the leadership, no, I'm not going to pursue that at this time. And then about 3 weeks later, I was going home to visit my parents, and they live about 2 hours from here. So I was just driving, and I put some music on, and I was just praying, and I was really just asking God to come speak to me. I didn't really have anything specific I wanted him to speak to me about, but just spending time with God. And in that moment, the presence of the Lord just was so tangible. I still can go back on hard days. I go back to that time when I was in the car, and God just spoke to me so clearly, Brittany, I want you to start your State Farm agency. And I immediately just started sobbing because I was like, I had all these reasons why I shouldn't do this. I went to school to be in the ministry. I don't know the first thing about running a business. I flunked out of math in high school. In fact, my tutor in high school said to my parents, I cannot work with this girl anymore. She is just not getting it. And insurance and financial services is what I do. So I was like, God, this is just not for me. I'm supposed to work at a church. And then he said, Brittany, I want you to own your own State Farm agency with me. And in that moment, the peace of God was just so real. And then he started to reveal to me that what I had been doing over the last 4 years was ministry. He brought up times where I would meet with customers and I got to pray with them in their heartache after losing a spouse. Or I got to show up to somebody's house after having a fire and hand them a check. And I got to sit with people who had just had a baby, and I got to help them plan for their baby's future. All of that was ministry. And what I didn't realize is my definition of ministry was so different than God's definition of ministry at the time. And so I am so thankful to say that I did say yes. That was one of the hardest yeses I've ever had to say. And I told God, okay, but I'm only doing this with you. And that was 7 years ago. And since then, my husband has answered his own call to join me in the ministry, or the ministry, it's a ministry. He has answered his own call to join me at the agency, and he helps me manage the team and grow the business. We have 6 team members under us, and they are one of my greatest ministries. I get to go in and love on this team every day. And then we have about 3,000 customers that we get to just talk to, interact with every single day. And just, like I said, love on them and show them the hands and feet of Jesus. Something that I felt like God showed me in the car that day, because again, I had 2 hours to mull this over with the Lord, because I was like, this is not happening. And he said, Brittany, when people come into a church, they come guarded and they feel like they have to come prepared and cleaned up. But when they walk into your State Farm insurance agency, they don't know that they're about to meet the presence of God. And they get to sit with you and you get to be the hands and feet of Jesus to a raw, unfiltered person who's just coming really hurting or broken or even happy, and you get to show them the love of Jesus. And when God showed me that, it just transformed my mind, and I never looked back. I never thought I was going to be working at a church again, because this now had become my ministry. So my identity now is not vocational ministry. My identity is loving God and loving people in any form that God brings my way. So that's my story. I know it sounded very fluffy. It hasn't been fluffy. It has been really hard. There's been days where I come home like, I can't do this anymore. I am a mom and a wife, and I have a business, and it's a lot of work. But God always reminds me when he said, I want you to do this with me. And I always remember he is with me. So I just want to share a few points of why, some things that God has brought out in my story. And I hope that it encourages you, because I think we're all kind of like-minded in this room. We are business people who love Jesus and want to share Jesus with people. But these are some of my biggest takeaways from my story is hold your plan loosely. Because when I graduated college, I was holding my plan to be in the ministry so tightly. And God said, you're putting your plan above me, and we need to swap that. Because Proverbs 19:21 says, many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. And what I love about that verse is it's not saying don't make plans, just sit, wait on the Lord. It's not saying that. It says make your plans. You can have plans, but let God's purpose prevail. So make your plans. That's what I was doing. But when I got in that car that day, I was able to say, okay, God, this is yours. Then if you want to shift, I will shift with you. And then the second one is listen and obey. So like I said, we have a 2-year-old, and Emma, if you want to put his picture up here, this is Remington Joe, and he is so fun, full of life, crazy, but he's 2. So anybody else had a 2-year-old or have a 2-year-old? Okay, my condolences, because this is not for the faint of heart. He is so fun, but also very defiant. And so we have to say, listen and obey every day, multiple times a day. Remington, listen and obey. And I found that if I'm in the other room and I'm like, Remington, listen and obey, doesn't work. If I'm standing over him, Remington, listen and obey, doesn't work. But when I get down on Remington's level and I hold his little face and I lock eyes with him, because he says to me when he wants my attention, Mommy, look in mine eyes. So I say it, Remington, look in my eyes. And he's usually like looking everywhere. And then when he locks eyes with me, I say, listen and obey. And it works. And when I was preparing for this, I felt like God said, Brittany, that's exactly what I want from you. I want you to posture yourself to lock eyes with me face to face so I can tell you what I want for your life. And when I do that, because you know what, I didn't know in the car that day when I was meeting with Jesus that he was going to completely shift my entire life. But I did. I postured myself to get to a place where I was just listening. And that's half the battle, right? Because we're all busy. We have a ton of stuff to do. But when we get alone with God, we get face to face with him, that's when he can speak. And then the second part of that is then obeying. And it's not easy to obey, because there's a lot of times where you think you know best for your life. But I can guarantee you, when you do what God has asked you to do and you obey, then it works out. It does, doesn't it, babe? It works out. It has worked out for us. And then the third thing before I wrap up is to trust God's yes and God's no. So I have a very, the type of personality I have is I'm usually 2 or 3 steps ahead of God. And I'm always like, let's do this. Let's go. I'm ready. I'm a mover and a shaker, as they call me. So I just want to always be going. My husband, on the other hand, is very slow. Let's take our time. Let's mull over the decision before we make it. He's very calculated. Neither one is right or wrong. Mine is a little better, but neither one is right or wrong. But for my personality, for someone like me, I have to learn to trust God's no. Because when he says yes, usually I'm like, yeah, let's do it. I was already there, God. But I have to learn when God says no, when I'm ready to do something and God is saying, hey, let's take a step back. Let's hold off on that. I have to trust that, because my initial response would be to keep going. So if I'm feeling any type of this isn't right, then I can basically know that is God. But for my husband, he would be like, yeah, God, of course it's a no. Of course it's a no. But when God's telling him yes, he has to take heed to that and say, okay, God, I trust you. I'm going to step out in faith. I don't know why this is what we're doing, but I'm going to do it. So you have to know your own personality and know, which one do I need to trust more? Because typically you can trust one more than the other. But anyways, that is just some encouragement from my story over the last 7 years. And I'm sure in another 7 years, I'll have another ton of things that I've learned. But I just thank you guys so much for the time to speak. And Eric, thank you for the time and inviting me.